They called me a failure. At 18, I was kicked out of the house, told I would never amount to anything. For years, I believed it, carried the weight of their words, and tried to survive on my own. But yesterday, everything changed. My father called, voice trembling, begging for $5 million to save their failing company. They expected me to help without question, to forgive instantly. I held the contract in my hands, stared at their desperate eyes, and felt something shift inside me. So tell me, what would you do if the ones who broke you needed saving? The phone rang at exactly 2 a.m, a harsh, insistent buzz that shattered the quiet of my apartment. I stared at the screen. My father's name glowed back at me. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Ever since they called me worthless, kicked me out at 18, and left me scrambling to piece together a life without their approval, my relationship with them had been fragile at best. And yet here they were again, desperate, needy, expecting the impossible. I hesitated before picking up. "Emily," my father's voice trembled, thick with panic. "We need your help. $5 million. Our company. It won't survive without it." My stomach sank. My heart raced, not from fear, but from a well of anger I had long kept buried. For years, I had supported this family emotionally and financially, often without complaint, never demanding anything in return. And now, in their crisis, they assumed I would still be at their beck and call. The number hovered in my mind as I glanced at my bank account. The sum wasn't an issue. I could cover it if I wanted to. But should I? My mind immediately flashed back to that night when I turned 18, suitcase in hand, standing on the curb with my father, shouting that I was a failure, my mother's eyes full of disappointment that never softened. I remembered how they had laughed when I struggled to find a place to live, how I worked 2 jobs just to survive, how I poured my heart into helping them with anything they asked, only to be dismissed, minimized, and controlled. I sank into my chair, phone pressed to my ear, but my mind drifting into the past. I could still feel the sting of being unseen, unheard, a ghost in my own family. Every birthday spent alone, every holiday where my presence was acknowledged only to criticize, every whispered insult behind my back. All those moments resurfaced now, sharp and unforgiving. My parents had a way of making love feel like a weapon. I had internalized that belief for far too long, allowing their manipulation to shape my worth. A subtle ping broke my reverie. A message from my brother appeared on my phone. I opened it cautiously. The text was brief but chilling. "Dad says you'll understand. Don't let Mom find out I told you this." My brow furrowed. There was a plan unfolding that I hadn't been privy to, a plan that could either entrap me or give me leverage. The ambiguity was deliberate, calculated, and infuriating. I wondered silently, had he always been on their side, or was he quietly testing my boundaries? I couldn't tell yet, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. I clicked back to the call. "Emily, please," my father pleaded. "You're our only chance. Sign here, and we can keep everything alive." I felt the weight of those words, the pressure to conform, to forgive, to comply with the very people who had undermined me for decades. I clenched the phone tightly. Could I really rescue the people who had made me question my own existence? Could I be expected to set aside all those years of humiliation, betrayal, and neglect? Scrolling through my emails distractedly, I stumbled upon one from the law firm representing my parents' business. My eyes widened. The email contained confidential information about my own stake in the company, a portion of shares I had no idea I legally owned. Micro cliffhanger struck immediately. If I responded, they would know I was aware. If I stayed silent, I might lose an opportunity to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I froze, torn between action and inaction. If it were you, would you press send or stay silent? I leaned back, letting the night air wash over me. Alone in my apartment, the distant hum of the city below, I allowed myself a moment to simply breathe, to process the layers of resentment and longing coiled inside me. This was the rhythm I had learned to survive on. Brief moments of calm to navigate the storm of family demands and emotional manipulation. The quiet gave me space to remember who I was beyond their expectations. The Emily who had fought for herself, who had survived abandonment, who had built a life from the remnants of their disregard. The memory of being excluded from the family group chat for their last holiday gathering surfaced. The laughter, the jokes, the conspiracies shared behind my back. It was never just a casual exclusion. It was calculated, a way to assert control, to remind me of my supposed inferiority. Gaslighting had been a constant companion, twisting my perception of reality, making me question my judgments and my worth. And yet, here I was, confronted with an opportunity to rewrite the rules. The challenge was no longer just survival, it was strategy. My eyes wandered back to the bank balance, the email, and my brother's cryptic message. Every detail layered another question, another twist. I could feel the familiar churn of emotions, frustration, grief, anger, curiosity, rising and falling in waves. This was the pattern I had grown accustomed to, a sinuous blend of conflict and reflection, tension and pause, forcing me to constantly reassess my choices. Every pause in my thought was a chance to gain clarity. Every spike in emotion, a reminder that this was bigger than a simple financial transaction. I finally placed the phone down for a moment, not hanging up, but not speaking either. The unanswered questions lingered. Was this truly a plea for help or another trap? Could I trust my brother, or was he complicit? How much of their desperation was genuine, and how much was manipulation to pull me back into a cycle I had spent years escaping? I sat with the uncertainty, allowing the discomfort to sharpen my awareness rather than diminish it. The stakes were high, and my next move would determine more than just dollars. It would define my relationship with a family that had both shaped and scarred me. As I stared at the glow of the city lights through the window, the first tendrils of determination crept in. I wouldn't be a passive participant in their drama any longer. I would observe, calculate, and decide on my terms. The night was long, the questions many, and the weight of the past undeniable. But for the first time, I felt the faint thrill of agency, a spark that suggested that what came next would be mine to control, not theirs. The contract lay on the kitchen table, a sterile sheet of paper that felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried. $5 million. 5 million reasons to question everything I thought I knew about my family, about loyalty, and about the true cost of forgiveness. My father's desperate eyes were fixed on me, pleading without words, and my mother hovered nearby, silent but expectant. Their faces were masks, carefully constructed, hiding years of manipulation beneath the veneer of panic. For a moment, I wanted to throw the papers across the room, to let them scramble in the ruins of their own making. Instead, I held the pen, my fingers brushing the ink, and hesitated. Could I really help the people who had spent my childhood belittling me, who had used my generosity as leverage against my self-esteem? The micro cliffhanger tightened around my thoughts. If I signed, I would save them, but at what personal cost? My pulse quickened as memories surged forward uninvited, the nights I cried alone because I wasn't enough, the countless times I had sacrificed my happiness for a family that never truly saw me. Then a new layer of betrayal revealed itself. I had discovered, hidden deep within their financial reports, that the money my father now begged for had been squandered on reckless investments he never mentioned, projects doomed from the start. They had banked on me to fix a mess they deliberately concealed. My stomach twisted. The realization was sharp and bitter, cutting through the fog of my initial hesitation. Could this be forgiven? I doubted it. Could it be used? That question lingered, dangerous and compelling. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the steam blur my vision for a moment. The warmth soothed some of the tension, but didn't dull the sting of betrayal. As I sipped slowly, I allowed myself to remember the nights I had spent in despair after being locked out of their house, the times I had waited for calls that never came, the holidays I had missed while watching family photos appear on social media without me. The rhythm of my memories followed the sinuous pattern of pain and reflection I had grown accustomed to. A rise of anger, a fall into sadness, a spike of curiosity, then a pause to breathe and assess. I wanted my audience, those who might be watching this story unfold, to feel the weight of each moment, to understand the vulnerability that still lingered beneath my armor. As the city hummed quietly outside my window, I picked up my laptop and began documenting everything: bank transfers, missed payments, emails, phone records. The pieces of the puzzle that had been scattered over years were starting to align, and each new discovery added a piece of power back into my hands. I felt a subtle shift in my perception of control. I was no longer merely a victim. I was becoming a strategist. The more I investigated, the clearer the picture became. Patterns emerged in the way my parents communicated, in the way they omitted details, in the subtle manipulations that had always dictated my choices. The twist was undeniable. This wasn't just desperation. This was a carefully crafted trap. And I was supposed to fall right into it. But I wouldn't. Not this time. My awareness was sharpening, my instincts guiding me toward actions I had been too naive to consider in the past. I reached out to my network cautiously. My lawyer, who had advised me years ago on minor family disputes, now received a discreet email outlining the new revelations. My financial advisor, previously kept at arm's length, was pulled into the strategy. Friends I trusted implicitly were now aware of the stakes, serving as sounding boards and additional eyes on every piece of correspondence. The micro cliffhanger tightened once again. One friend's hesitant advice hinted at a hidden loyalty, a shadow of potential betrayal. Could someone I trusted turn out to be aligned with the very people I was wary of? The uncertainty gnawed at me, yet it also added a layer of vigilance that was necessary for the next steps. I leaned back, reflecting on the emotional shift that had occurred within me. The fear and confusion that once dictated my choices were giving way to clarity, tempered with compassion. I wasn't cold, detached, or vengeful in a reckless way. I was aware, alert, and deliberate. The sinuous rise and fall of emotion carried me from outrage at their audacity to a calm determination. punctuated by moments of nostalgia and empathy. I remembered the little victories I had claimed over the years, the nights I had stood up for myself, the times I had refused to be diminished. Each memory was a brick, reinforcing the foundation upon which I would now build my plan. The contract still sat before me, a symbol of their desperation and my leverage. I didn't sign, not yet. Instead, I made notes, planned contingencies, and mentally rehearsed conversations I hadn't yet had. The layers of strategy expanded, intertwining with the emotional narrative that made my position both precarious and potent. For the first time, the responsibility didn't feel like a burden. It felt like an instrument of empowerment, a tool that could finally rebalance the power that had long been skewed in their favor. As the night deepened, I allowed myself another pause, another sip of coffee, another reflection on the complex emotions swirling within me. I was caught between the desire to forgive and the need to protect myself. I was both wary and hopeful, cautious yet ready to act. The micro cliffhanger persisted, somewhere in the shadows of their manipulation. A truth yet undiscovered waited to surface, and I knew that uncovering it would be the key to deciding not just the fate of the company, but the trajectory of my life. I closed my laptop for a moment and leaned against the chair, taking a steadying breath. The raw, chaotic mix of emotions, betrayal, anger, curiosity, and empathy, had transformed into a focus that I had never possessed before. I was no longer simply reacting. I was calculating, planning, and preparing to confront not just the immediate crisis, but the systemic patterns of abuse that had shaped my life for decades. The breaking point had arrived, but instead of collapsing under the weight, I was ready to stand and orchestrate the next move with precision and care. I started the next day with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My apartment, once a sanctuary from the chaos of my family, now transformed into a command center. Laptops hummed, phones buzzed intermittently, and every email, every message became a potential clue. I dove into the digital evidence with the precision of someone who had spent decades learning to survive, tracing transactions, analyzing communication patterns, and recording conversations that hinted at hidden motives. Each click, each scroll was deliberate, a step toward understanding the full extent of the deception that had been woven around me since childhood. The first discovery was subtle, a series of old emails between my parents and a financial consultant. At first glance, nothing alarming, but as I dug deeper, I realized they had diverted significant funds into investments that were doomed to fail, and had never disclosed these moves. My eyes widened as I connected the dots. The current crisis wasn't just about mismanagement. It was carefully orchestrated to make them appear helpless, ensuring I would be the one to save them. The micro cliffhanger hit me suddenly. I had stumbled onto something crucial, but I wasn't sure how to use it yet. Should I confront them immediately or hold my cards close while gathering more evidence? Then came the twist that changed everything. A notification popped up on my screen, an unfamiliar email address, encrypted messages from someone I hadn't suspected. My heart skipped. It wasn't my parents, it was my cousin, someone I had always trusted implicitly, now revealed as a second layer of manipulation, feeding information back to them and possibly sabotaging my moves. The tension tightened around me. I leaned back, letting the weight of betrayal settle, but it didn't crush me. Instead, it sharpened my focus. The battlefield had expanded, and I would need allies to navigate it successfully. I took a deep breath and began mapping out who I could trust. My lawyer had proven discretion before. My financial advisor had a track record of integrity. A few close friends had quietly supported me through past crises. I listed them carefully, assigning roles, ensuring that each person could verify and back up the information I was collecting. Each new ally became a safeguard against surprises. But trust wasn't binary. Every decision carried risk. Some friends had loyalties that might shift if the stakes changed. I paused and posed a silent question, almost speaking to the audience watching. Who would you trust if your life and legacy were on the line? I returned to the evidence. The more I examined, the more patterns emerged. Past bank statements hinted at unrecorded transfers. Receipts suggested payments to shell companies, and conversations revealed hidden agendas. I recorded phone calls, backed up texts, and carefully annotated each finding. Every new detail added a layer of clarity, a map of the deception I had been trapped in for decades. Yet, the micro cliffhanger remained. There was a document buried somewhere in the files, a key piece of evidence that could shift the balance completely, but I hadn't found it yet. The uncertainty kept me alert, my mind racing ahead while my body took measured pauses to breathe, sip coffee, and reflect. The emotional rhythm of the work mirrored the sine wave of my journey. Anger surged when I realized the depth of their deceit, only to ebb into sorrow as I remembered my childhood struggles. I allowed these moments of reflection to temper my decisions, to ensure that my strategy wasn't fueled by raw emotion, but by calculated awareness. These pauses also allowed me to connect with my audience, to share the internal struggle that made me human, the pain, the hesitation, and the determination that coexisted within me. As the days progressed, I expanded my network carefully. Digital forums provided insights into financial manipulations. Online communities offered perspectives on family betrayal, and social media clues revealed interactions that had been hidden in plain sight. I coordinated discreet communications between my lawyer, financial advisor, and a trusted friend who was acting as my eyes and ears in the family circle. This web of allies created a buffer, a controlled environment where I could test hypotheses without alerting the manipulative parties. The subtle tension of potential betrayal from someone I thought reliable kept the strategy dynamic, the audience guessing along with me. There was a quiet moment late in the evening when I sat back with a cup of tea, reviewing notes and letting the weight of the discoveries settle. I spoke softly to myself, almost as if confiding in someone watching. Every secret they kept, every manipulation, every lie, it's all coming to light, and I'll need every piece to decide my next move. That intimacy, sharing my inner thoughts, allowed a pause in the narrative, giving the audience space to breathe and empathize with my journey. It was a rhythm I wanted them to feel. Tension, revelation, pause, reflection. Then the surge of anticipation again. Then the breakthrough came. Hidden deep in a folder of financial statements was a transfer trail that revealed the full extent of the funds my parents had hidden, as well as a reference to a legal document I had never seen. A codicil to the family trust that included my share of the company. The twist was astonishing. The second manipulator, my cousin, had attempted to redirect the funds without my knowledge, but the trail left an unintended record. My pulse quickened. Finally, I had found the evidence that could reshape the playing field entirely. I leaned back and allowed myself a brief smile. The strategy was forming, clearer than ever, but it was only the beginning. I wasn't a passive participant anymore. I had knowledge, allies, and the beginnings of a plan that respected both my intelligence and my humanity. The micro cliffhanger lingered. The next steps would require finesse, timing, and judgment. Each decision could trigger a cascade of consequences I hadn't yet imagined. The night stretched before me, quiet yet electric, full of possibilities, with the knowledge that the truth, once revealed, would change everything. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, almost deceptively calm. I had waited months for this moment, tracing every financial thread, gathering allies, and plotting moves that my parents never imagined I could foresee. The company's conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and anxiety as my father placed the contract before me. $5 million, an astronomical sum, yet it had become a tool in my hands rather than a trap. The timing was perfect, a legal deadline pressed against them, a shareholder meeting that would draw attention, and a birthday celebration for my mother that demanded public appearances. Each event stacked like dominoes, ready for a carefully orchestrated reaction. I leaned back, examining their faces. Panic, expectation, and a subtle undertone of arrogance mingled there. They believed they had prepared me, thought that my long history of compliance ensured I would comply once more. But they didn't know that I had walked through the labyrinth of their manipulations and emerged with clarity. The twist was simple yet satisfying. I would use their own strategies against them. I would not act recklessly or vindictively, but I would expose the cracks in their control, turning desperation into accountability. "Sign here," my father said, his voice a mixture of relief and desperation. I picked up the pen, letting it hover just above the paper. The micro cliffhanger tightened. My smile was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight. What would I do next? Would I save them? Or would the years of betrayal tip the scales? I let the audience feel the pause, the tension hanging in the air, as I took a quiet breath, remembering nights when I had been dismissed, ignored, or blamed for circumstances beyond my control. My fingers trembled, not with fear, but with the knowledge of the power I now held. I allowed myself a moment to remember my childhood, sitting alone on cold floors, rejected, belittled, yet determined to survive. These were not memories of weakness, but markers of resilience. In sharing these thoughts with my audience, I created a rhythm of empathy, a pause to connect with my inner self and the viewers, before plunging back into the complexity of the moment. The emotional arc oscillated, drawing tension up and then easing slightly, just enough to maintain engagement while deepening understanding. I set the pen down carefully and began to orchestrate subtle moves. The emails I had discovered, the financial discrepancies, and the hidden codicil to the trust would all be introduced in layers. I let hints slip during the conversation, enough to unsettle them, but not so much as to trigger panic. My parents' eyes flickered with unease as they noticed my calm, my deliberate pauses. They were used to immediate reactions, to obedience, to fear-driven compliance. That was no longer my role. The first wave of suspense unfolded as I revealed minor but telling inconsistencies, mismanaged accounts, unexplained withdrawals, and hints of an unseen accomplice, the cousin who had tried to redirect funds secretly. As predicted, their responses followed a pattern I had anticipated. My father's face paled, denial flickered across his features, and my mother attempted to gaslight, twisting my observations into accusations against me. Micro cliffhanger. They didn't yet realize that the evidence I held was both documented and corroborated by my allies. The suspense built, electric, as I maintained the rhythm of calm, letting them reveal themselves through panic instead of me forcing confessions. I activated my counter strategy carefully. Financial records were secured, emails were backed up, and communication channels were restricted. Any attempt they made to regain control was met with a silent, controlled response, leaving them frustrated and uncertain. The room, once a stage for my submission, had become a theater of revelation where truth unfolded methodically. The tension oscillated as their attempts to manipulate me escalated into chaotic bursts of anger and attempts to regain influence. The twist deepened when my cousin, the secondary manipulator, revealed themselves mid-discussion, trying to intervene and sway outcomes in favor of my parents. But every move had already been anticipated. The web of alliances I had built, lawyers, advisors, and trusted friends, acted as a safety net, absorbing surprises while maintaining the upper hand. My emotions flowed through the audience like a sine wave. Suspense surged, irritation flared, a minor satisfaction peeked through as their plans began to crumble. Then tension rose again as new variables emerged. I allowed myself a small personal victory, a slight nod as an ally whispered confirmation of a hidden transaction being blocked, a subtle acknowledgement that my preparations had neutralized attempts at sabotage. Yet I didn't celebrate loudly. The narrative demanded restraint, and the pause allowed the audience to breathe and process the unfolding drama. I returned to the contract, looking up at my parents who were now visibly anxious, unsure which pieces of their deception I had discovered. My calm exterior belied the careful calculation beneath, a controlled mixture of empathy and strategy. By the time the conversation drew toward a conclusion, my parents were both flustered and introspective. The micro cliffhanger persisted. They could no longer predict my actions, and the audience felt the uncertainty, wondering what move I would make next. The layers of twist had shifted the power dynamics completely, yet my humanity remained intact. I had not acted out of malice, but from a place of awareness and deliberate action. The satisfaction was subtle but potent. Justice was unfolding on my terms, without losing my moral compass. The room eventually emptied, leaving me alone to reflect on the events. I poured another cup of tea, savoring the quiet after the storm of tension. The sine wave of emotions lingered: frustration, relief, subtle joy, curiosity about what would come next. I considered the lessons of the day, the timing of every move, the power of observation, the necessity of patience, and the importance of allies. I realized that strategic revenge was not about immediate gratification or cruelty. It was about creating conditions where truth revealed itself, where manipulation could be countered without sacrificing integrity. As I looked out the window at the city lights, I felt the faintest thrill of control, tempered by empathy and moral clarity. The first stage of the plan was executed. The contract, the timing, the micro cliffhangers. They had all been tools to assert my agency, not weapons to inflict unnecessary pain. The real game had begun, and the audience could feel the suspense, the anticipation of what my next move would reveal. The night stretched ahead, full of uncertainty, yet now illuminated by the knowledge that I was no longer at the mercy of their schemes. The courtroom lights were harsh, sterile, and unyielding, yet they illuminated a truth that had long been buried. My parents sat across from me, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and simmering panic. Over the past weeks, the dominoes I had carefully set into motion had toppled one by one. Their authority over the company, once unchallenged, had evaporated. Shareholders questioned their decisions, previous partners withdrew support, and whispers of mismanagement spread across the industry. Their power, reputation, and control had dissolved almost overnight, and it was clear that the consequences of years of manipulation were finally catching up with them. I watched silently as the documents I had compiled were presented. Evidence of mismanaged funds, concealed investments, and the secondary manipulations orchestrated by my cousin. The reactions were predictable yet satisfying. My father's face turned pale, his attempts at justification faltering under the weight of hard evidence. My mother's composed exterior cracked, revealing the first true glimpse of panic. Every micro cliffhanger I had planted through careful hints and timing had matured, leaving them scrambling to understand how I had uncovered so much. And yet, the ultimate question lingered: who would truly pay for the cascade of deceit and betrayal? Just when I allowed myself a brief sense of accomplishment, the twist I hadn't anticipated revealed itself. A person I had once trusted implicitly, a longtime family friend who had advised me during smaller disputes years ago, stepped forward unexpectedly. Their words hinted at ulterior motives and undisclosed loyalties, complicating the neat picture I had drawn. My pulse quickened. I had thought I knew all the pieces, but now the boardroom felt like a minefield of hidden agendas. The micro cliffhanger tightened, leaving the audience guessing alongside me. Who could be trusted, and who would face the consequences first? I allowed a moment of reflection, leaning back in my chair and closing my eyes. The journey that had brought me here was not just about numbers, contracts, or manipulation. It was about reclaiming my identity, my confidence, and my sense of justice. Memories of countless nights spent feeling powerless surged to the surface, but they no longer chained me. Instead, they reminded me of the resilience I had cultivated, the strategies I had honed, and the awareness I had gained. I let the audience feel the weight of these emotions, a brief pause that amplified the stakes and humanized the victory to come. The cascade of consequences continued to unfold. Legal repercussions hit my parents' closest allies, exposing financial misconduct and unethical decisions that had been hidden in plain sight. Social repercussions followed. Professional networks distanced themselves, long-standing partnerships dissolved, and whispers of betrayal echoed beyond the walls of the courtroom. My parents' social standing eroded almost as rapidly as their professional authority. I observed with a sense of restrained satisfaction, careful not to indulge in malice, but allowing a quiet acknowledgement that justice, delayed but deliberate, was taking its course. Through it all, I maintained a delicate balance. I could have allowed anger or resentment to dictate my actions, but I chose strategy over vengeance. My allies and I had orchestrated a series of interventions designed not to humiliate, but to reveal truth. The ripple effect became evident as others who had been manipulated or misled by my family began stepping forward, their voices adding depth to the unfolding revelations. Their courage reinforced the importance of transparency and integrity, amplifying the impact of the work I had done. The micro cliffhanger returned with a subtle yet powerful force. Hidden documents, previously overlooked in the flurry of activity, surfaced to reveal one final secret: the codicil to the family trust, a legal mechanism that contained provisions favoring me in ways my parents had never intended. The revelation was subtle yet profound. My share of the company, safeguarded by law and strategy, ensured that I had both security and leverage. The audience, drawn into the suspense, now understood the stakes. A quiet, decisive victory was unfolding, and its implications were far-reaching. I took a moment to breathe, savoring the delicate mixture of triumph and reflection. I had regained control of my life, my finances, and my emotions, but the journey had been emotionally taxing. The micro cliffhanger softened into a pause for empathy, a chance for the audience to share in both the relief and the lingering sadness that accompanies the dismantling of deep-seated familial bonds. Pride mingled with grief as I realized the depth of loss required to achieve this level of clarity and autonomy. As the dust settled, I felt the beginnings of real satisfaction. My financial freedom was secure, and my emotional boundaries were firmly established. The consequences had been meted out fairly, not through cruelty, but through deliberate strategy. Those who had manipulated, lied, and betrayed faced their reckoning while I reclaimed my dignity and autonomy. The ripple effect extended beyond me, inspiring others who had felt powerless within their families to recognize the strength in measured action and careful planning. Finally, the ultimate twist emerged. A long-concealed provision in the trust revealed a pathway for future opportunities I had not anticipated. It was not just about recompense, it was about the promise of a new beginning, a fresh start unburdened by past manipulation. The micro cliffhanger lingered, subtle but potent. What would I choose to do with this unexpected empowerment? The audience could feel the suspense, sensing both closure and the potential for new narratives. I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph. The journey from betrayal and manipulation to clarity and empowerment had been arduous, fraught with emotional turbulence, strategic challenges, and ethical decisions. And yet, standing in the aftermath, I felt the first real sense of liberation, a blend of satisfaction, joy, and renewed purpose. I had survived, adapted, and orchestrated justice, all while maintaining the humanity that had once been tested by those who sought to control me. The story, while reaching a pivotal point, left a space for reflection and anticipation, the sine wave of emotion gently resolving into a sense of achievement and cautious hope. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting a soft golden glow across my apartment. For the first time in years, I felt the room was entirely mine, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The chaos, manipulation, and constant scrutiny of my family's control were behind me, replaced with a clarity that felt both fragile and exhilarating. I had constructed walls that no one could breach, boundaries that were deliberate and impenetrable. Limited contact with my parents and extended family had become a necessity. Digital communications were carefully curated, and financial independence was no longer a goal. It was my reality. The first few days were quiet, almost serene. I organized my finances, set up systems to ensure autonomy, and communicated only when necessary, with those who had previously tried to exploit me. Professional boundaries were firmly in place. Work and personal life were clearly separated, and every decision was made with intention. Emotional boundaries followed suit. I no longer allowed guilt, manipulation, or past grievances to dictate my reactions. Each interaction was measured, thoughtful, and aligned with the life I was determined to create. The micro cliffhanger emerged subtly, an unexpected email from someone I had long admired, a former mentor who now proposed a collaborative venture that could alter my path in ways I had never anticipated. I paused, considering the implications, knowing that even in this new life, choices carried weight and consequences. I spent a long afternoon reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. From the nights of feeling unseen and undervalued, to the months of painstaking strategy and evidence gathering, every challenge had forged a new layer of resilience. I sipped my tea and allowed myself to relive moments of growth. The clarity gained through patience, the empowerment earned through calculated action, and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming agency. Each reflection reinforced the importance of the boundaries I had set. They were not barriers to connection, but safeguards for preserving the integrity and stability of my new life. The ripple effects of my actions extended beyond the immediate sphere of my family. Friends and colleagues who had once struggled with their own toxic relationships reached out, inspired by the way I had navigated the complex web of betrayal and manipulation. I offered guidance, shared insights, and encouraged awareness of psychological tactics that could undermine personal well-being. Seeing others find their footing, empowered by strategies and principles that I had implemented, added a new dimension to my recovery. It was a subtle, ongoing affirmation that the work I had done was not just for myself, but could inspire a wider community to reclaim control over their lives. Financial freedom brought opportunities I had never anticipated. Investments, ventures, and projects that had once seemed distant or impossible now appeared viable and tangible. I embraced them with a sense of purpose, weighing each option carefully, considering not just potential gain, but alignment with my values and long-term vision. The micro cliffhanger lingered in my mind. The collaboration offered by my former mentor promised both risk and reward, a tantalizing opportunity to expand my influence and creativity, yet it demanded careful consideration. I allowed the audience to sit with me in this uncertainty, to weigh the possibilities alongside me, and to experience the tension and anticipation that accompanies pivotal choices. Emotionally, the landscape was transformed. I invested in relationships built on authenticity and mutual respect, nurturing connections that had previously been neglected. Friendships deepened, new alliances formed, and I gradually allowed myself to trust again, cautiously but openly. The trauma of years of manipulation and betrayal did not vanish instantly, but the structure of my life now protected my emotional well-being, allowing me to engage with the world from a position of stability and awareness. I could now listen, respond, and act without the constant undercurrent of fear or self-doubt that had once governed my interactions. In the quiet of one evening, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I considered the generational impact of my journey. The patterns of abuse, manipulation, and suppression that had plagued my family for decades were now being dismantled. My choices, strategies, and reclaimed agency set a precedent that could ripple forward, breaking cycles and fostering healthier dynamics for the future. Educational initiatives, mentorship opportunities, and the sharing of personal narratives became tools through which I could extend the lessons learned into broader societal change. The micro cliffhanger surfaced again in my mind. What would be the first step in using this momentum to make a tangible impact? I took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of liberation. Every strategy, every calculated action, every emotional boundary had converged to create this moment of clarity and empowerment. The final twist, revealed through the codicil and financial documentation, ensured that I had a foundation for continued growth, autonomy, and influence. I was no longer reacting to others' manipulations. I was proactively shaping the trajectory of my life, grounded in principles that balanced strategy with humanity. Looking toward the future, I felt a sense of possibility unlike anything I had experienced before. Financial freedom, authentic relationships, and a platform to create meaningful change were within reach. I considered the paths ahead with careful curiosity, aware that each choice carried the potential for both growth and challenge. Hidden interaction with the audience. What path do you think Emily will choose next? Would she pursue the collaboration, continue to strengthen her independence, or embark on a new venture entirely unforeseen? The suspense lingered, but the foundation was secure. Hope settled in, steady and enduring. Empowerment was no longer a fleeting sensation, but a constant intrinsic part of my identity. The potential ahead seemed limitless, framed by hard-won lessons and deliberate strategy. I allowed myself a quiet smile, savoring the convergence of achievement, autonomy, and purpose. For the first time in years, I felt fully aligned with the life I had created, resilient, self-assured, and poised to thrive. The journey from vulnerability to empowerment had reached its culmination, leaving a narrative of triumph, insight, and the promise of unlimited potential.